No sound. Lies. Lies. Gnats. Good to see you, Nat. Thomas Joseph. Maria Hickling. What a name. That's a phenomenal name. Oh, while we wait, and if you're watching this later, we have a Discord group. There's a link pinned to the live chat on YouTube. There's a link on the TikTok profile if you're over there for some reason that I'll never understand. But it's there. Discord is great. Theology, Bible, all from people who are smarter than you could possibly imagine and more insightful and will confuse you in good ways more than you could possibly imagine. It is free. It will always be free. Go do that. Pastor is here. Look at that. Could that be any more like bright and happy? I don't think it could. I do not think it could. Jacob JWA2301. Josh Singleton. A lot of people have their full names on TikTok. It's either that or like wild kitty kitty lick lick numbers and random letters. There's like no in between. Interesting dynamic. TikTok, go to YouTube. We love you, Pastor. Ghost, good to see you. Tonight's good stuff. Go, hey, real quick. Whenever I put these headphones on now, I think Ghost called it a Snuggie for my headphones. I think is what he called this thing. A Snuggie. If I'm wrong on that, remind me what you actually said. But I think that's what you said. And now it's all I think about every time. It's all I think about every time. Now said, to be fair, Joe, I think I found you on TikTok. Yeah, the sad thing is I think most of the group found me on TikTok, which is why I'm putting the live up there now too. It's the sad reality. So like the best of the best that we have, or the majority at the very least, are from TikTok. It is what it is. It is what it is. And I'm trying another round of like throwing out some social media video, like at least a couple times a week, if I can, because I had just been completely MIA for the past few months. But because of that right there, is because you're absolutely right. That is how most people got here. Fortunately and unfortunately. Can't judge us for our past. True, but I judge myself for my present every time I open the TikTok app. Which is very rare. But hopefully more for that purpose right there. Scott. Jamick. Is that your legal name? Jamick? Jamitch? Is that what it is? Ruth found YouTube. Okay. I think the most is TikTok, and then I think a handful from Instagram and maybe a few from YouTube. From what I have gathered. But it's like the majority was TikTok. Because TikTok blew up real hard, real quick. And even since I've been absent, it just keeps going. I don't understand why at all. But TikTok just keeps growing. It's like close to 100,000 on TikTok, and I don't even post really anymore. The Snuggie headphones are goated at this point. It's accurate. I never would have thought of it like that. But that's exactly what it is. Because these headphones are like 10 years old. And the band is literally falling apart. But they still work. Solid headphones. Okay. Well, here's the dealio. So 15 and then possibly 16. Hopefully 16. 16 is real hot. A lot going on in 16. 15 is good though too. Some necessary information out of 15 as well. So God's covenant with Abraham. A lot here. a lot here that we'll need to know for later, I guess, is the reason that it's kind of important. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. The interesting thing here is that the terms that are used, the terminology here is that of like prophetic visions or other prophetic experiences. It's the same type of phrasing, which is not always used. So it's used in like very specific circumstances or situations in terms or context of prophecy. And that's what's being used here. So Abraham, you could say, could be classified in the same classification as prophets because of this. There's some argument about that, full context wise of Abraham as a character. But there's also a very, very good argument that he would be classified the same as a prophet. So just something, I guess, to think about. Quote here, this is from the Lord. The Lord came to Abram, Yahweh came to Abram in a vision and said, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great." Now, the shield is a super common thing, right? Like even the New Testament parallels this often. But the shield is also pertinent in terms of prophetic language. So it's kind of another hit to the category of prophecy in terms of it being tied to Abram. So your shield, your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, "O Lord God," or "O Yahweh, my Lord," is like the more proper translation. Because I guess quick reminder for anybody who's not been here, and I think I only talked about it in the beginning. Anytime in Genesis specifically, but most of the time in the Old Testament, "O Lord," but the word Lord did not exist. It was never written originally. This is 100% revision throughout history. Lord never appeared. It was always Yahweh. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. We took Yahweh out a very long time ago. And now I don't know of any modern Bibles that have Yahweh where it should be. If you get into like reading the Hebrew, like I think Ghost is, and I think Scott does some, you'll start to notice that this term Lord is totally made up in terms of Old Testament literature. It should absolutely say Yahweh. So as we've been reading, I've been replacing it like in real time often for that reason. So anyways, beside the point, kind of. Actually, it kind of has a point. So just hang on one second. It said, "O Yahweh, God," but it would be, "O Yahweh, my Lord," is how it would actually read. "What will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus," remembering the promise that God made to Abram, which was to create a nation under him, through him, biologically. Remembering his age is very high. His wife's age, very high. So in normal circumstances, this would be ridiculous for God to make the promise, were it to not be something miraculous. So he has this vision, and God is giving him comfort in a sense. He's saying, "I will be your shield. I'll be your divine protection." And he's coming to him in a vision. He's coming to him in a prophetic context. This "O Yahweh, my Lord" is not used often. It's used in Genesis once here. It's used in Deuteronomy twice. Otherwise, this title in Hebrew is not used anywhere else. Which, does that matter? Kind of. Because if you think about how many times in the Old Testament somebody cries out to God in a similar way, right? "O Lord God," "O Yahweh, my Lord," it's often. That happens often. But it happening with this term, this title, is not often. It's actually just 3 times. So there's some kind of significance. There has to be. "What will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" ? And Abram said, "Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir." what that means is like it's not tension, but there's kind of a thing going on between God and Abram right now. Maybe call it disbelief, maybe call it contention, or maybe call it Abram's just having a hard time because none of this crap makes any sense. None of the promise doesn't make sense. What is happening after the promise doesn't make sense. You promised this thing, the thing is not happening. I'm just getting older. What I'm gonna have to make member of my household my heir. The member of my household would be somebody who is not his actual child. It was not uncommon during this time in and out of the Jewish religion for somebody within the household who is not biologically related to become the heir if that couple didn't have children. So a lot of the time this would be like a servant or a handmaid of some kind. Somebody who is trusted, somebody who is like a part of the family, because remembering, I guess, that like slavery in the Old Testament, it, in some cases, was kind of what you imagine slavery to be in our context, which is really, really bad. But in many other situations, it wasn't. There were slaves who were treated like children. They were treated well, I guess is what I mean. They were treated like family. They were taken care of. They were fed, and a lot of them held status, like high status in the family, and some held high status in the society in a greater context. So what Abram was saying, his fear basically is that this member of the household who is not his biological child, which is probably a servant, would become the heir because they are still childless. Verse 4, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, this man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. So God is confirming the promise. He's saying, I made you this promise. Abram is struggling with the promise because it doesn't seem like it's happening. God is coming back and saying, no, the promise is still intact. It will not be this servant or this member of your household. It will be your child. This will be a biological child. That is who the heir will be, period. Verse 5, and he brought him outside and said, look toward the heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. So he confirms the promise, and then he expands on the confirmation of the promise. So he's saying, no, it will be your son. It will be a biological child. And also, again, because this was the other part of the promise, is there will be an epic F-ton of them. You will have a bunch. There will be a nation built under you. The numbering of the stars, or looking to the stars to a corresponding number, is used other places in the Old Testament too. It's not an uncommon way to phrase it, but it's exactly what it comes across as. It's an image to be able to see. Like, if you look up at the stars, it's almost as if you can't count them all. Number the stars if you are able to number them, because they are so great. He's trying to kind of paint that picture for Abram too. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Confirmation, confirmation, confirmation. And he believed the Lord, Abram believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. This is interesting because in, where is it? Romans 4, you have Paul draw a parallel from this section of Genesis. It's Romans 4, 1 through 8. I'm not going to read it, but if you care, I'll throw it out here if anybody cares for later. Romans 4, 1 through 8. But Paul draws a direct parallel from this conversation, this back and forth. That's interesting, which is, it's something that Paul obviously does often because he was essentially a scholar in the Pentateuch in the Old Testament in general. But interesting thing. So he... Sorry, okay, we're good. We'll come back to that. 7, and he said unto him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans. To give you this land to possess. The land is Canaan. Remember, like last week, and then some of the week before, I believe, we talked about Canaan and the Canaanites too as like this umbrella group of people to label people. But this geographically is where he's talking about. This land to possess is Canaan, which is also a part of the covenant that's happening right here, that's being confirmed and is going to get brought to fruition here in a moment. Lord help us, Tampa. I'm sneaking in and pretending I've been here the whole time. It's good to see you. 8, but he said, "O Lord God," again, this would be "O Yahweh Lord." Different. How am I to know that I shall possess it? In reference to the land. This is less of an actual question. It's not him doubting or asking literally. This is more in context of the actual, like, the ceremony process of the covenant. So not just in the Bible, but in other literature of the time, the way that land was transferred, it often was done like under contract, basically. Not too dissimilar. Actually, yes, it's very dissimilar than what happens today, but the contract portion at least is kind of similar. So there was a ceremony that happened in the process of this type of transaction or transferring of property. That's more of what he's actually asking. It's not like, I fear God, you're not going to provide it to me. How will I get this land? It's like, okay, how will I know? Well, when is the ceremony going to take place? How will I know in context of like that? 9, he said to him, "Bring me a heifer, 3 years old, a female goat, 3 years old, a ram, 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Bring me a small portion of the ark." Verse 10. And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other. Now, I want to read you this from Logos, because I want to make sure I get it right. So, cutting them in half. The animals are cut in half, and the halves are separated. The most common expression for making a covenant in the Old Testament uses the Hebrew word karath, meaning to cut. This is because covenants usually involved literally cutting animals. This type of covenant practice was common in the ancient Near East, and it was common in other cultures too. It wasn't a strictly Jewish thing. It wasn't a. It's broad. It was broad. This is one of those things that if you've read the Old Testament with some intention, you know this, but the actual details of it, I don't. It's not a piece of information that I always remember. So I wanted to make sure I got that right, because it's interesting to understand the true detail of it. So again, the animals are cut in half, and the halves are then separated. The most common expression for making a covenant in the Old Testament uses the Hebrew word karath, meaning to cut, which is something that I think a lot of people do know, that portion of it. But it's because the covenants usually involved literally cutting the animals, which is what is happening here. That type of practice was super common in and out of the Bible. Do you think he was seeing Jesus or Malak visually, either in his mind's eye or maybe even his physical eye? I want to come back to that, because in 16 we get, or is it later here? The angel of the Lord thing. Yeah, so in 16 verse 7, Ghost, if you want to get ahead, I want to revisit that question in verse 7 on 16. Which is the angel of the Lord found her, Sarah, found it was the servant girl. But the angel of the Lord in 16:7. Look into that, while we go through 15. And then I want to come back to that question about who Abram was seeing, whether that was Jesus or not. I guess I'll just leave it there. 16:7, it relates to your question a lot. And so I'm curious kind of where you land with that. I think they're uniquely English. Random, but are Lord and God only English words? Do other languages use the same words, or are they uniquely English? Yeah, I believe they are English. There are other words that express obviously the same thing in other languages. I know in Spanish and Italian it's different, but curious which languages share the same names. I'll have to look into it. I think the meanings attached to the words is more important. Yeah, right. The word is just the word is an agreed upon a string of letters to convey a universal concept. Is what like that's what language really is. It's a culturally agreed upon way of verbally expressing in a subjective manner an objective concept or idea. That's why across the world we're able to express the same concepts and ideas, but it sounds so different that we have no idea what each other is saying. But once you can translate it, we know exactly what you're saying, because the concepts and the ideals are universally understood in most cases. I guess I shouldn't say always, but in most cases, the manner in which we express them is what is subjective. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, but yeah, Ghost, don't let me forget, because I want to come back to that. So the question was, when Abram had the vision, who was he actually engaging with? Was it Jesus? Was it Malak? Was it Yahweh? And then when we get to the next chapter, I want to revisit it, because there's another interesting thing that kind of ties into that. Now I have to remember where I was. We were past 6. I know that. Yeah, okay, we were talking about the ceremony. All right, we're in 12. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell over Abram, and behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. The deep sleep is confusing, because in the New Testament, we use a similar terminology for something that means something different. Here, this is kind of like a trance in the Old Testament, but not always. It's kind of like a spiritually induced trance, a very deep sleep where it's some kind of different level from like just normal REM sleep or something. There's a different aspect to it. So that's the deep sleep fell upon Abram. And then it talks about like the really heavy sense of dread. This great darkness fell upon him. It's not Abram that is experiencing the darkness. The darkness itself is what is dreadful. And other places in the Bible, in Exodus, in Psalm, and in Job, is what I have here. The same Hebrew term is used in context of a feeling a character will experience in the presence of God, which is interesting. And that's one to get into in the Hebrew if you're weird and you want to dig deep on it. 13, then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. 400 years is problematic, because there's no way to make this make sense, in my opinion. You can do some searching yourself, but if you zoom out and you look at the timeline of the Old Testament, and you factor in everything we know and where we think it is, and this started then and ended then, the 400 years doesn't make sense. So it's probably not literal. So then you have to pass it over to the numerology people, and they can think of a million things of great value and meaning to attribute to it, which is fine. Or you can say it was just a way of embellishment to express a very long time, and it wasn't meant to be taken literally. The choice is yours. 14, but I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. This was after Egypt, when the Hebrews left and were loaded. So this is foreshadowing, right? Which is good. There's some confirmation. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. This is interesting because in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew faith, in the Jewish faith, they don't have the same views as Christians do on heaven and hell. We've talked about that some on like old Thursdays when we talked about things like hell. They had Sheol, which is different, and Ghost could definitely fill you in on Sheol, because he is much better kept than I am. But The interesting thing is that this is positive. Is to your fathers in peace. There's kind of a positive connotation to it, which is not normal in the Old Testament in terms of death. There's a blatant negativity to death in most scenarios, or at the very least, it's neutral because they don't believe the same things as Christians. So from the context of like the reader of the time or the author of the time, it has significance because it's positive. It's interesting because it's abnormal, and it's something to just take note of. Uh-oh, hope everything's okay, Lil. You should be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And we'll get into that during another chapter, because I want to save a little bit of time, but we will get into it. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give you this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river of Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kizanites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Raphaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girshmites, and the Jebusites. The only few, because some of these we'll get into with chapter 10 and 14 that we skipped, because there were a lot of people, places, and things stuff that we'll do at the end of Genesis. I did want to pull a few of these, though, and go over them. So let me pull this up. So first, the river of Egypt. This was not the Nile. This is out of Logos, which is referred to with the Hebrew word Yor elsewhere in the Old Testament. And what they have listed here is later in Genesis and also in Exodus 2. Rather, this river is the Wadi El Arish, which I am not familiar with. The geographical markers in this verse are referencing the southern and the northern boundaries of the land promised to Abram and his descendants. So just a little bit of geography. I wasn't familiar, so I didn't want to skip over it. And then the Kenites. This people group seem to be named after Cain from Genesis 4. This semi-nomadic tribe was known for metalworking and are connected to the Midianites and Amalekites. And what they've got here is links to Judges, links to Number, and 1 Samuel is where they're pulling that from. Then the Kenizzites. This group of people are connected to the Edomites, descendants of Esau, which we briefly talked about a couple weeks ago in terms of Esau. We talked a very, very little bit about it. Where they're getting that from is Genesis 36, 11, 15, and 42. 15 is, I think, when we talked about it. No. 11. We're doing 15 right now. 11 is when we talked about that. And then the Cadmonites. This people group is not mentioned anywhere else in the Old Testament, but may be the same as the Kedemites, a phrase which may be rendered people of the East, noted in several passages. The Kedemites were semi-nomadic and ventured as far north as today Syria and as far south as the Red Sea. They're getting that from Judges 6, 7, and 8 is where they're pulling that from. The issue with the Kedemites, or the Kedmonites, is that it's similar to the Canaanites, which is just a very general term. So it's likely that it refers to a lot of different groups of people, rather than a specific small group of people. Or not even small, but even a large, specific group of people or specific culture. It very well could not, because it's more a geographical title than it is a specific, close-knit culture title. Okay, cool. 16. And then we're going to go back to the angel of the Lord, because I'm curious. And I think Ghost said something else about it. So I'll scroll back up to it when we get there. So Sarah and Hagar, depending on who you talk to. Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. So we're continuing on the issue of the prophecy. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abram, "Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children." Actually, we'll come back to it. "Go in to my servant," continuing on. "It may be that I shall obtain children for her." Back in the day, this would probably be frowned upon today. But actually, it's kind of coming back, I feel like. It should be frowned upon, in my opinion. But back in the day, if you as a woman were not able to produce children, if you were deemed to be barren, it was usually seen as a divine judgment against you from God. That was the general belief. So, meaning, the general belief is that if a woman can't have children, it was her fault. That's what the women believed, and that's what the men believed. They believed it was a divine judgment from God, essentially a punishment, which I find interesting, because the original punishment was that you had to have kids and that it would hurt. So I've always found it interesting that then in other stories and in and out of the Bible, that it then becomes a punishment to not have to have kids. It's never made sense to me on like a logical front. In the back of my head, at surface level, I get it, like fine. But on a deeper logical level, I'm like, this makes no sense. God first punished her by saying, "You will have children and it's going to totally suck, baby girl." And now God's like, "Now I'm going to punish you by removing the original punishment. So you'll have no punishment. You won't have kids and it also won't suck because it won't hurt." It's never made any sense. But anyway, that's what's happening here. So Sarah's saying, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me." That's the punishment. That's the divine judgment from bearing children. "Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." That means exactly, damn, can't win. That means exactly what it sounds like. So also back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for a barren woman, a woman who could not have children, to then go find another lady, usually someone the husband already knew. Oftentimes, this was one of those quote unquote slaves or servants that were held in high regard within the household. Oftentimes, they were brought in to be the surrogate, essentially. This is a word that isn't used anymore, is like concubine. So Sarah can't have the kids. They know they're supposed to have kids. They also just probably want kids. And so they're like, okay, well, I can't do it. Sarah's like, I can't do it. So I'm going to bring in this younger servant girl. It was an Egyptian. And she is going to have the babies for me. And she will act as kind of the surrogate. We know this was common for the time. This is not a biblical thing. I've heard a lot of like atheist arguments that this type of thing, oh, it's so immoral. Christians are immoral because they have no problem with what was happening in the Old Testament. This was happening everywhere. There's plenty of there's plenty of other literature outside the Bible from the same time period, Mesopotamian literature, that has this exact same type of thing. This was just a normal cultural thing that would happen. It's not a biblical thing. So if you ever get that argument, defend yourself. It's absolute garbage. This was happening everywhere in all cultures. Very, very normal. Very, very normal. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. This is interesting because this is somewhat abnormal. As a wife. The potential indication is that Hagar held much higher status than people like to admit, either within the household or in the general culture. Because normally, this surrogate is the word we use today in modern life, but concubine would not be called a wife. She would not get to hold that status because she was not the wife. So it's interesting here because it alludes to the concept that Hagar had a higher status than I feel like most people were willing to admit. Just interesting note. Interesting note. And he went into Hagar and she conceived. So they made sweet love with Shania Twain on in the background. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. So Hagar, the servant girl, now wife, the concubine, the surrogate, she now believes she is divinely blessed because she feels like she is a part of the prophecy. She feels like she's been written in to the oddly specific, Joe. She's been written into this prophetic experience. So now she's looking at Sarah with contempt. She's looking down on Sarah, and now Hagar, who obviously already had high status, now feels as though she has even higher status. So she's kind of got a complex going on. Oddly specific. If you go back through old YouTube videos that I've done where I talk about sexual relations, that's what I always say. Just to be clear, I don't like Shania Twain, but I feel like it is lovemaking music, like stereotypical lovemaking music. So that's how I've always described it. I feel like I have to defend myself a little bit there. So there it is. And Sarah said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you." So she's pissed. The way this, in my opinion, should be translated is, "May the injustice to me be on you." Sarah feels like she is now the victim of injustice. Wrong done, whatever, same thing. But I feel like it's a very clean translation to injustice. I don't know why it's not done. Sarah feels like she is the victim of injustice. Which, interesting a bit, because she kind of started it. It was kind of her idea. She brought this on. However, it seems like the way it actually ended up turning out was not the way she expected. She expected, seemingly, that Hagar would come in, act as surrogate, and then kind of piss off. Not to be blunt or rude, but that seems to be what her belief was. And now it's not really turned out to be that way, but see what happens next. So she feels injustice has been done to her. She continues on. "I gave my servant to your embrace," for sweet baby making, "and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt," explaining the prior verse. "May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarah, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." So Abram's like, "Dude, I don't care. If you're upset, like, deal with her. Do whatever you want. I got what I needed, whatever." Then Sarah dealt harshly with her. I want to bring this up because this is a good note. The Hammurabi is like, when you guys hear me talk about Mosaic law and Levitical law, you know what I'm talking about because they're biblical things. The Hammurabi is like the equivalent in the Mesopotamian world. So in Mesopotamian literature, it's essentially equivalent to, kind of, like in concept, it's equivalent to Mosaic Levitical law. The Hammurabi has a very similar thing here, where you are allowed to treat slaves in a very rough manner if they were not behaving how you wanted them to behave. Just furthering what I was saying a minute ago about how this was parallel cultural stuff across the board. It was not a biblical thing. So now Sarah, the master, right, who holds hierarchy, is dealing with Hagar harshly. And so Hagar ran away. Now we get into the part I wanted to come back on from Ghost's original question. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. So Hagar was on her way towards Egypt, which is her home, right? It's where she came from. The angel of the Lord. Let me grab this real quick. Malach Yahweh is used in reference to Yahweh made visible or embodied, although it is not clear that the angel is always Yahweh, which is exactly what Ghost was asking about earlier when he said, do you think he, talking about Abram, was seeing Jesus or Malach, like visually, either in his mind's eye or maybe even his physical eyes? I don't know because of this, because there are verses like this. Deals 16:7 through 15 deals with the clues about the angel's identity. Right, so you get some clarity. It's not enough for me. Did it end up being enough for you, Ghost? Do you feel clear? You also said, I think the meanings attached to the word. Oh no, we already talked about that. Okay, so similarly to when Abram was having a prophetic moment with God through a vision, you got this God is present, possibly, like Ghost said, in the mind's eye or possibly physically. It's a physical visual stimulus. And then you have this, the angel of the Lord found her by the spring of the water in the wilderness. The other places this is used, being Exodus and Judges, it's used in the same context as chapter 15. Yahweh made visible, God made visible or embodied somehow. The issue is that not only here, but in the other areas of the Bible too, in Exodus and Judges, it's not clear that it's Yahweh. So Ghost's original question was like, could that be Jesus? Possibly. This sounds exactly like something someone who likes to make love to Shania Twain. I'm pretty sure Abram was a Keith Sweat kind of guy. His Only Son was a great movie, and I felt displayed this perfectly. It really put in real time what this whole scene is talking about. I have never seen that. I'll have to look at that. It really hit me as a wife what it was like in those times and brought it to life. It also made me appreciate that I don't have to be in that situation. Yeah, I would not be a fan of that whole ordeal. Not a fan. Goes to not these verses alone, but everything together. I'm 90% solid, but still not fully convinced pertaining to it being Jesus. Yeah, for a long time. So the angel of the Lord thing, the physical embodiment with Abram, the vision. For a long time, I was the 100% no, it's not Jesus. That was my belief for a very, very long time. Only relatively recently have I been trying to open myself back up to that possibility. So I've made a point that as we go through the Old Testament, I'm going to try to have fresh eyes on all of those scenarios because I want to reassess. It was just something I decided a very long time ago that no, that's not what I believed, which is never good in my opinion. So I'm opening it back up, and I'm excited to get some of those other places to see if anything else stands out this time around. But it's interesting stuff to think about. This, when in the Old Testament we get when we read about these visions or embodiments of Yahweh, is it Yahweh? Because the text is usually not specific. So it's open in a sense to interpretation of whether is it an angel? Is it Yahweh? Is it Jesus? Is it something else? Calling your boss, Graves. Graves, good to see you. Graves was here 30 minutes before we started, just to be clear. So although he's at work, he basically beat me, which is very impressive. Read verse 13. Okay, yeah, I'll skip down. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God of seeing. 13, right? Yeah, 13. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are God of seeing. This is where it's El Roy, right? Actually, here, hold on. Let me burn through this, and then we'll spend some time on that. So the angel of the Lord found her at the spring of the wilderness, the springs of the way to Shur. She's going to Egypt. Hagar is going back to Egypt. And she said, Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarah. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. So God is correcting Hagar from running away. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. Ishmael, God hears, which is why I wanted to burn through this real quick, because Ghost is referencing you are a God of seeing. We're having another sense come in here. So you shall call his name Ishmael, which means God hears, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, which just means very headstrong. They will move on cultures. His hand against everyone. He will be in war consistently, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. This is not super clear. It could mean that they'll live close together. It could also mean that they will fight with one another, which it kind of is a big difference. Now to where Ghost wanted us. So verse 13. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God of seeing. For she said, truly here, I have seen him who looks after me. It's very specific. Therefore, the well was called Bir Lai Roy. It lies between Kadesh and Barit. Now, you are El Roy. This is out of Logos. The Hebrew phrase used here, El Roy, can be translated as God of seeing, referring to God's ability to see everything. God of my seeing, a testimonial by Hagar that she has witnessed a divine being, or God who sees me. A more personal version of the first translation, Hagar's remaining words suggest that the phrase deliberately expresses all of these. The reason for that is the two-part quote. So when she said, you are a God of seeing, for she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. It's insanely specific. Goes said in verse 12, against him is added. It isn't in the, do you have the Hebrew up? Just against him. Is that the only part that's out? Let's read it. So without it, 12. He shall be a wild donkey of a man. His hand against everyone. Ghost is saying, I think, that and everyone's hand against him was added, which wouldn't surprise me. It's irrelevant, really. If all of 12, yeah, that's the only part that's left out. Okay, this is super common. This is super common. So the part that I just underlined with the squiggly orange line, Ghost pointed out that this is not in the original manuscript. It's not in the original Hebrew text. Super common. This is why a lot of the time I'll stop and I'll say something seems to be an attempt to embellish or make a story better. In my opinion, without looking into this at all, this is probably what this is. He shall be a wild donkey of a man. So we're building up this image of who Ishmael will be. His hand against everyone. Now this is about his character and what his actions and behavior will be. Ghost is saying, and everyone's hand against him. This is irrelevant to the actual text. We don't need it. You can skip it and continue on, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen, and you lose nothing at all. This is, to me, in my opinion, do your own research. This is an embellishment for theatrics to add to the story. This is, to many people's surprise, super common. The Bible is littered with this. Things that just didn't exist, and then they did. And then we just kept putting them in. Look at how fast Ghost found that. It was like, hey, that's not actually in the Bible. Super common. Insanely common. And everybody just kind of agreed to be okay with it. This one doesn't bother me a lot because it's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. It bothers me like on principle because we shouldn't add to the Bible. Just use the original manuscripts. But to me, it's just an embellishment. It doesn't add anything. It doesn't take anything away. You can take it out and nothing changes at all. So it's annoying to me more than anything else. It's just annoying. Out of the blue. Out of the blue. And everyone's hand against him. Embellishment. Adding to the story. He'll be against everyone. Everyone will be against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. Thanks for pointing that out. I hope you do that if you ever see that again. Always do that. That's really good. That's a great example. Okay, so we talked about that. Therefore, the well was called Beer. We talked about that. And Hagar bore Abram a son. So here we go. Fruition. Hagar bore Abram a son. And Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar born Ishmael, which again is God hears. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So we're moving into the covenant of circumcision next, which gets good. I think it's relevant pertaining to Islam. I'm interested. Why? Oh, I think it's relevant, Ghost said, pertaining to Islam. I guess, yeah. I guess. You're talking about Ishmael, right? But why would the Christians want it in? For anybody who doesn't know, Ishmael is key player. A key player. And Ghost knows more about this than I do too. So ask Ghost maybe in Discord. But Ishmael is a key player in Islam. Ghost said the fact that the verse has been chopped and screwed from original Hebrew. Right, but what's the benefit? Like, what is the benefit? What, just to say that, like, that everyone will be against Ishmael? The fact that the verse has been chopped and screwed from the original Hebrew. I don't know why it's being tampered with. Yeah, but there's a lot of tampering, though. It's like one of many. But I think it's a good point, though, that you bring up Islam. That's an interesting point. It's a fair point. Maybe coincidence that something has changed right around the creation of Ishmael, but maybe not. The only thing I guess I could see is that, like, it just seems manipulative. I'll look into it. Definitely do, because I'm interested. Because I like looking at it a couple different ways. Is that are we saying that the manipulator in this scenario comes from the Muslim faith? Did Islamic pressure or I'm trying to think of how to say this best. Did Christians or Jews remove or alter the text to try to paint a picture in terms of Islam? Or did the Muslim faith in some way have pressure applied to have the verse added so that there's this perception of everyone against Ishmael? But it does go both ways. His hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. It's a good point, though. There seems to be a higher pressure to keep tension between the three Abrahamic faiths. True. But wouldn't you say Christians and Jews would benefit more if the verse wasn't there? Because then it would just seem that he's aggressive, right? He's a wild donkey of a man. He's against everybody. He's even going to fight with his kinsfolk or his kinsmen. I feel like that would make the tension more versus saying he'll be against everyone, but everyone else will also be against him. Unless, like you said, I guess just that there will be, you guys are supposed to hate each other. That the hate shouldn't just be them being bad. It should be us being bad to them as well. I don't know. If you look into it, I'd be super curious to hear what you find. Either way, it's a great point. It's a great point. One, that you pointed out, this was not in the Bible. Great example. Doesn't exist. Was totally added later. Second great point is that it's either coincidentally or absolutely on purpose in context of the creation of a massive influence in Islam, which is very interesting. And I bet that's a deep hole that I'd be very curious to hear about if you find anything. Very curious to hear about. Okay, let me see real quick. I get your point. I'm not sure the motivations. It just seems like they added that Ishmael was violent. I don't like when stuff is added whole cloth. But was that added, or was just the everyone against him added? So maybe I misunderstood. Is 12 altogether not there? Because I thought, I'd be surprised if it wasn't. Unless you just think the whole thing was altered. If you think the whole thing was altered, then I'm with you, because that would make sense and it wouldn't surprise me. I'd have to look. I don't have the Hebrew up, but pull up the concordance. Let me see. This is 16. Looking. See it here too, actually. Interesting. Did you find it anywhere? Because a few of these are corroborating it. There is a there's a lot of commentary here exactly on what you're talking about, though. This contention between the Abrahamic religions. He won't be a people person. His hand against every one of them. Interesting. All right, let me try to get. Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. What Hebrew Bible are you reading, too? This is how it gets really hard. It's a freaking puzzle. It's not just like the normal belief is like, okay, we have the Old Testament, the New Testament, cool, great. No, you don't. You have numerous Old Testament versions in Hebrew. Then you have almost unlimited Blue Letter Bible, unlimited versions of the Old Testament in English, like a never-ending scale. And then you have the same for the New Testament. So it's like, what will corroborate from 1 to 1 won't with 2 to 1. And 3 will fit to 1. But 3 will not fit to anything else. And you play this game of trying to make them make sense. And it seems as though they'll never make sense. All right, ESV 16. It has been tampered with for sure, Kel said. But his hand will be against everybody. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this doesn't make sense, actually. Interesting. And it's not just that doesn't make sense. Some of the rest of this doesn't make sense. I kind of want to tear from 7 on apart. Oh, that's problematic, man. It like doesn't fit. It's not flowing the way, but maybe now I'm like reading it with the bias. The flow seems off. It seems odd. And then like the some of the term choice. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem cohesive, I guess, with the rest of it. This might be something to try to get into. Yeah, right. No, I see exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, if either of you guys spend time on this, please tag me in Discord. I'm gonna look into it a little bit because yeah, it seems like copy paste. It really does. I get what you're talking about now. Looking at it outside of the Bible. Outside of the Bible we were reading. Interesting. Okay. If anybody has no idea what we're talking about, I'm sure Ghost can link you guys to some resources to look at if you care. Otherwise, maybe if Ghost does some work on this, or Ghost and Mikkel, I'm gonna look at it too and maybe break down some of it. At any rate, though, if you guys remind me next week and maybe link me to anything you guys figure out, I'd be down to go over it again. This is but for everybody who's lost, this is one of the things like I complain about a lot, where I want to bash my head against the wall. There are just certain things that don't make sense in the greater context or even in the immediate context. This is one of them that doesn't make sense in the greater context necessarily, but it's harder to say that because it doesn't affect all that much, like from the local level out. But in the immediate context, it doesn't fit. You'll find that when you again like get out of your ESV or your NIV or whatever the English Bible you're listening or you're watching or you're reading is, get out of it. Go to Blue Letter Bible. There are a million resources to get deeper into text and to look through concordances and see. You'll be able to see better, and it takes like some time to figure it out, but to be able to see the flow of the actual writing. And you'll notice often that there are just these points where like it seems like the flow drops off a cliff and then goes back on the cliff. So there's this section where you dropped off the cliff that just makes no sense in the context, the immediate local context of what you're reading. It seems forced. It seems out of flow. And oftentimes you'll find that those little sections are points of contention. And this is a great example of that because of the tie to Islam here. Is the RSV translated from the Septuagint? Ooh, honestly, I don't want to say. My head is saying the Septuagint, but I'm extremely open to being wrong about that. So I would look that up. But I want to say the revised standard version is from the Septuagint. Pretty sure. But this is a great example of like, this seems copy paste. It seems to not make sense. And it's also a massive contention point because of the issues between the Abrahamic religions. Will you please shout out my mom in case she did click the link to send her for this? Lord Help Us Tampa Mom? Is Lord Help Us Tampa Mom here? Is mom? If mom's here, she needs to be in the chat. You need to Zoom call your mom and show her how to use the YouTube chat and get her tech savvied up to be able to talk about the conspiracies in the Bible with us. It's very important. It's very important. I hope mom is not here on the day that we start to try to call out a conspiracy in the Bible. It's not the best first day, I feel like, for Bible study. So in case mom is here, this is all with good intention. None of us, I don't believe, I'll speak for everybody. None of us have disbelief in the Bible because of things like this. I'll again speak for everybody, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. We just understand that the book was put together by people, and people are not perfect. And that's why we have all these versions and translations, and why commentaries are required, and why commentaries say different things depending on the person that wrote commentary, is that they are put together by people. The concepts, the principles, the stories, for the most part, I think everybody here believes are inspired and believe probably the same as many or most Christians. Where we veer from that, still speaking for everybody, is that we're not willing to just look over this. This is something that Ghost very rightfully was like, in Hebrew that doesn't fit. In Hebrew that isn't there, which is the most important one, is when the verse is just not there. But in English, we have these words here. Like, where the hell did these words come from? Okay, then look into that. And then Ghost was like, hey, this is interesting. There's a verse added here that is contentious in nature, that is also at the origin point of Ishmael in the Bible, which is directly and massively important to Islam, which where even today there's unbelievable contention between the two religions. And then broader, there's unbelievable contention between all of the Abrahamic religions. Like, really bad. This is why I love Ghost. Incredible catch. Very good catch. And I'm dying to see if you guys find anything on this. Or not find it, because you found it. But if you find any more or get into it deeper, I'm super curious. And I'm definitely going to spend some time looking at it myself. Because yes, when you get out of the normal English, it doesn't flow. It doesn't make sense. It's one of those points where it doesn't make sense. I warned her before McElligott were provocateurs. But in the best possible way. It's because we want the truth, man. I want the truth at any cost. And I'm okay with being uncomfortable to get that. So Wikipedia says RSV is primarily the Septuagint. Okay. I'd say most of the most popular English translations are Septuagint. The vast majority are Septuagint, which makes this even more strange. They just don't exist. They just don't exist in the Septuagint. I'm no expert, but it seems weird. It's definitely weird. Yeah, please do. I'm super curious. So if you guys find any more, please tag me. I'm very curious. And we can definitely talk about it again next week, maybe before we start. I'm down to revisiting this. This was a great catch. Because, yeah, it's not right. The weird hunters. That needs to be a thing. The weird hunters can be a role on Discord that you earn once you do this. What is happening here right now? When you bring weird stuff and then hunt down that weird stuff and share it with the group, you earn the role weird hunter. I think that's a great idea. I think that's a phenomenal idea. All right. I gotta get rolling. Thursday, Adam and Eve, which I am beyond loving. I freaking love reading the Apocrypha. I forgot how much I loved it. I'm having a great time. So I hope I'm not alone in that. We'll continue on with Adam and Eve, book 1. And yeah, it's been good. It's been good. It's super fun. Pastora will always pray for us on our mission. Yeah, Pastora is the forever cheerleader of the weird hunting. She is the positive light with all of the darkness surrounding the hunting. Because it feels dark sometimes. In a way, I guess. But it's good. It's positive stuff. It's very good stuff. Jesus Christ. All right, I'm out. You guys have a good night. I'm very much going to watch Discord, so I hope you guys find some stuff. And if I get into it sooner than later, I'll throw some stuff out there too. I always enjoy these studies. Everyone have a wonderful night. God bless. Lord help us, Tampa. I hope you and your mother have a lovely night. And Lord help us, Tampa mom. Come back next time. And hopefully it's a little less weird hunting for you. Love you guys.